Okay, good morning. So where we are is Yud Amud Beis today, but before we get to the Gemara and Yud Amud Beis, we have to finish a little bit on Yud Amud Aleph, which we did not do yesterday. All right, so the Gemara, if you recall, said that at the end of the Amud, that the whole Meister was Chizkiyo and Yeshaya, right? Chizkiyo was in danger of dying, and Yeshaya paid him a visit. Hashem had told him that Hashem made a shower between them. Neither one wanted to go see the other one. And he warned him that you're going to die. Why? Because you are dealing too much with the divine secrets. The fact that your child is not going to be a Shem Mitzvah is not your issue. And as we additionally explained yesterday, maybe this was in part due to the fact that Chizkiyahu himself had been inviting in Ashur, which is part of the realpolitik of those days, and the issues that were attendant at the time in terms of their politics, which we can't get into now. Just wanted to finish the Amud here on Yud Amud Aleph with the Hagayos of the Bach, right at on the side there. If you look, the Bach finishes up this Gemara, and he says as follows. This is, I think, coming from Ein Yaakov. It says the Bach, Hein Yikteluni Le'ayachal, right? If I'm going to die, I'm not going to daven. Of course, I am going to daven. I have a tradition. I feel Chayav Chadim Nachas Al Tavar Shel Adam Al Yanatz Min Arachim. Don't give up hope even till the last moments. So the Gemara continues, according to the way the box Gersa is over here, and says as follows: L'Seif Yoav Le Barte. In the end, he did in fact give him his daughter to marry. Right? Ishai gave him the daughter. Nothing we named Menashe for Rav Shekeh. And ended up they had two children, Menashe and Rav Shekeh. Yom Echadar Kivinu Akatzbe. One day he was going with both of them on his shoulders, and Lamtrin Lebe Madrasha to take him to the base Madrash. Amachad Minayel Chazi Resha the Abel Limtuye Be Galduni. One of them said, "Oh, look at Daddy's head! It's such a good head. We should roast some fish on it." Oh, Daddy's head is great. We should be able to put some idolatry on it. He threw them to the ground. Menashe Choya, Menashe lived, Rav Shekeh Mace, and Rav Shekeh died. He talked about himself that his Kalim, as it were ruined. This is the version of the Bach wants to add into the Gemara, which comes out very fascinating because Rav Shekeh, if you look there in the Navi, Rav Shekeh is the one who comes along and Mecharif Megadef, the Jewish people, and he spoke Yehudis. He had the dialect down. How did Rav Shekeh know? Because when we're saying that he died, didn't mean he died, but he left. And he not only left, he became a turncoat. Menashe, this terrible king, he was a horrible idolater, even though the Gemara says that he was not as bad. He knew things, but the pull of the Yetzer Hara of Avodah was so strong in those days that you couldn't stop it. But in any event, what this Gemara seems to indicate is that in fact he did marry the daughter, and he ended up having not only one bad kid but two bad kids. And if that's presumably the same Rav Shekeh, who ends up going to the Melech Asher on the other side, and is the one who was brought to the wall to speak scary things to the Jewish people, and they begged him to speak in a different language, speak in Aramaic, and he said no, because he wanted the masses to understand everybody should be terrified of him. So that is a little bit additional background on this Maisa here. Now, continues the Gemara, turning the page, Yud Amud Beis. Continues the Gemara, Amar Rav Chana, Nafil Ba'al Chalamis, Amar Le'Ladon L'Makom Meis. Even if a Baal Chalemis is going to tell you that tomorrow you're going to die, you know what Baal Chalemis, the word comes from? It comes from Paras Vayeshev. Hine Baal Chalemis talazeh bo, v'ato l'chuv v'nargeu, v'nashcheh b'chalavos, v'amanu chaya ro'ach halosu, v'niriyah ma'iyu chalom b'yisav. So the Baal Chalemis is telling you that you are going to die. Nevertheless, do not stop. Don't believe him. Don't stop davening and hoping for eventually a turnaround. Because in many dreams, many chalomis, there is lots of hevel. There's lots of stupidity. And it's just words. You should just be afraid of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Nothing else is worthwhile. Miyad v'yisev Chizkiyahu panav el hakir. So what did Chizkiyahu do? He has his tradition that he's not going to give up even in the last of moments. So what did he do? He turned his face to the wall, and he davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom that he should be saved from whatever the sickness was that he had, because of whatever the reasons were that he had not gotten married. He still asks, nevertheless, for forgiveness. He davens to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And of course, he saved, and we just saw the story that happened. And nevertheless, his kids were in fact bad, as he had predicted. My kir, says the Gemara, what does it mean, a kir? A kir is a wall. Remember, we already had the Gemara on Hayam Beis, Right, we learned that from this passage of Chizkiyahu Panav El Akir, that we learned that a person should not daven lifnei mitasoi. Right, that was more at the bottom of the page of Amud Yomi, that a person is not supposed to daven with something blocking him from the wall. We already pointed out in Tosfos that an ar and a beam of things that are set up in a shul, that is not considered being blocked from the wall. Obviously, your neighbors are not considered blockages from the wall either. So here we have different, as the Rabbi Akiva Eiger points out again on Hashas, you have different additional limud from this idea of Yisef Chizkiyahu Panav El Akir. So he turns his face to the wall and he davens. My kier, what is the wall that he's davening? Reb Shimon ben Lakish, Mekiras Libo, we're talking about the walls of his heart. He's davening from very deep place inside. Shenemar Mei Achila Kiras Libi, right? That we have a pasuk that talks about the Kiras Libi, the walls of one's heart. So he's not much davening from the very innards. Reb Levi Amar Iskei Akir. What does it mean? He's davening El Akir. It's talking about Iskei Akir on the issues of the wall. What does it mean? The issues of the wall. Amar Lefan of Rebbeinu Shalom. Hilkiyahu says, Hashem Umashin Namish. Remember the story of the Shinamis that we have in Malachim. The Shinamis comes to Elisha, and she makes him like a room, a portico, a place where he could stay. Umashin Namis. Shilay Asasal Akir Achas Ketana. Malach the Shinamis, who only made one little room, a little kleinchika room for Elisha. Nevertheless, Hechiyeh says, but no, he makes sure that her child is going to survive. Right? It seemed like her child died, and he revives him. Avi Abba Shechafetz Haichol Kule B'Kasef V'Zav. My grandfather Shlomo HaMelech, he built the incredible Beis Hamikdash, and he put so much silver and gold on it for you. Alachas Kama V'Kama, that you should save his son. In other words, me. Right, so that was the davening of Vayisev Chizkiyahu Panav El Akir. He's trying to bring down the tremendous zechus of the kir as it related to the Shinamis, which a fortiori, if Elisha was willing to save the Shinamis' son, which was just a small little room, then you for sure, Rebbeinu Shalom, should save me because my grandfather's zechus that he built such a massive Beis Hamikdash for you. This was the prayer of Chizkiyahu Melech. Finish the Gemara. Chizkiyahu is saying that you should remember this, that I walked before you be'emes uv'leiv shalom, that I walked before you in truth and with a full of hearts, right, with wholesomeness. I did always what was righteous in your eyes. What does it mean that he did what was righteous in the Rebbeinu Shalom's eyes? Amar Yehuda Amar Rav. Shestomach Geula Tefillah. Rabbi Yehuda Marav says because he was semech Geula to Tefillah. Rabbi Levi Amar Shagana Sefer Refuos. Rabbi Levi says it's because he hid the Sefer of the Refuos. What does this mean? That he was Samach Geula to Tefillah. We've already seen how important that is, right? Being Semech Geula to Tefillah, whether it's by Shachris, whether it's by Ma'ariv, it's very important to be Semech Geula to Tefillah. So that was potentially one thing that he did, and he was very proud of it. And this is what he means when he's saying, you should remember me, the Rebbeinu Shalom, as I walked before you. Okay, he's saying it's a big deal. Yeah. So that's one option. What's the second option? The second option is that, and you have to remember, being Semech Geula Tetzila for us today is not such a big option, right? We're not as impressed by it because of the fact that we're so used to it. By us, it's in the Siddur, it's in the printed prayer book. But in those days, before, the Rabbanon had created the Shemona Esrei as we have it today, which is done by Atzek Nesagdel, long after Chizkiyahu. So to be Semech Geula Tetzila before it's a thing, it's obviously a much bigger deal. And that's number one. Number two, we said the second thing that it could be that he did is that he's going to say for Refuos. This now opens up a much larger question, and we have to now go to this Mishnah Pesachim. Tana Rabbanan, Shisha Devarim, Asa Chizkiyahu Melech Al Gimel Hadulay, Al Gimel Lo Hadulay. There were 6 things that Chizkiyahu Melech did. 3, the rabbis agree with him, and 3, the rabbis did not agree with him. Al Gimel Hadulay. What are the 3 things that he did that they agree with him? Was gonna say for Refuos. He hid the Sefer of Refuos. What was the Sefer of Refuos? It was a book, and it had in this book incredible remedies, and people would look at the book, and they would get at the remedies, and guess what they wouldn't do? They wouldn't daven to the Rebbeinu Shalom. This opens up a much larger question. We're going to have it in Parshas Bechul Koset. Look at your major Ramban over there about how things worked in the days of the Nevi'im in terms of not having the need for doctors. Remember, the Ramban is a doctor, so he's talking against his own fach. But in the Ramban's opinion, going to a doctor is not an ideal situation. That is, in fact, the lower level that we're living on today. But in the ideal world, you had a problem, you went to a Navi who would tell you what you were doing wrong, because at the end of the day, the maladies that we have, while they are natural, they are expressions and are symptomatic of issues spiritually. Such is the opinion of the Ramban. Whether that is true for all Rishonim is a much, much larger and debated point. Maybe we should touch on it for just a moment, but I just want to first finish hitting on these 6 things. Okay, so number 1 was the Sefer of the Refuos that he hid, and they were made him. They said it was a good idea. He chopped up, he crushed the copper snake. You remember the copper snake? From Moshe Rabbeinu's time, there was the copper snake that they used in order to be able to heal people from the Nechashim, Hasrafim. So they put this copper snake on a stick. Whoever would look at it, and he would be able to survive. He would be able to live. He put his father's bones on a very, very dishonorable kind of a burial, right? Because Achaz was not a great guy. He had done a lot of bad things. So he instead of giving him an honorable burial, he gave him a very, very desultory one, a very negative burial. And again, they praised him for these 3 things. I'll give him 3 things he didn't get praised for. He shut up the waters of the Gichain spring. And they didn't. Anybody here been to Yerushalayim, the old city right next to the old city? There's something called the Davidson Center where they have these tours, right? And you can go on the Siloam tour. You can go on the tour where you go the water tunnels, the Cave of Chitzkiel water tunnel. If you have never been, next time you go to Yerushalayim, it's Kedai. It's an amazing, amazing experience. They've pretty much have all archaeologists agree that this was a water tunnel that was built by Chitzkiel in anticipation of the Assyrians, of Melech Asher coming and going to war against Yerushalayim. And the terror was that they're going to have not only access to water, but they're going to do a siege. We won't have access to water. So, but what they did is they made this water tunnel, which would take the waters from this underground spring, the Shiloah, the Meh Shiloach, which Shlomo Melech was anointed by. It's like as Rashi points out, it's not the Gichain which is the second river in Parashas Bereshis. It's this little spring, but it had enough water for Yerushalayim, and he redirected the water in a tunnel. They have no idea how. Even to this day, they have no idea how they managed to build it. It's through solid rock. They managed to meet 2 sides. That Siloam inscription, which tells you about the meeting, the day that they met, and their excitement that they had in the tunnel today. You can still see it, but it's not the real one. The real one, which is priceless, is held in Turkey in the Ottoman Empire. Israel has asked for it back repeatedly, and Erdogan absolutely says, "Over my dead body." But it's it's a major, major proof to the existence of Chizkiyahu and his power, the ability to put together tunnelers, to have such a degree of accuracy and ability, shows that he was not a weak king indeed. Anyhow, the rabbis were not happy with it because the Navi said that Asher is not going to win. Right? Everybody knows we don't know exactly what happened to Asher, but they end up all dying, and the army retreats. They never take over Yerushalayim. What happened and how they died, we don't 100% know, but somehow Sancheiriv gets defeated. And so what this shows is a little bit of lack of trust. If the Navi said that Asher is not going to be able to defeat you, you do not need to change the water source and bring it into Yerushalayim. So Valgim Lo'Hadula, that's the first one. He cut down the doors of the Heichal and he sent them as a daron, as a present, as a way of humbling himself to the king of Ashur, to Sancheiriv. Again, they did not agree to that. And he also was Ma'abed Shana. He made the second month of Adar in Nisan, and they weren't agreeing to them with that as well. So the Gemara asks on this one, the Gemara says, less of the Chizkiyahu Chodesh Hazel Lachem Rosh Chodashim. How could Chizkiyahu make a second month of Nisan? He made the Pesach come out of the second month. You're not allowed to be Ma'abed Shana when you're ready in Nisan. And that less of the Chizkiyahu. You can't make 2 months of Nisan. No, he didn't mean Ma'abed Shana in the middle of Nisan. Rather, what happened was he made a mistake in terms of what we say about Shmuel. Shmuel has obviously Shmuel being much, much later, but there was a fundamental idea that Shmuel said, we do not Mima'ab the Shana already in the 30th day of Adar. Since if it would be a Chaser the month, it would already be Nisan. So therefore, you do not Mima'ab the Shana at the very end of the month. So he didn't know about this idea that you're not able to Mima'ab the Shana the last day of the month of Adar, and he did. In fact, Mima'ab the Shana the last day of the month of Adar. And so that the rabbis were not agreeing with either. So we have one little more point about Chizkiah, but this is now the fundamental study of Chizkiah. So I want to just do a few things. Number one, in relation to the Sefer Refuas. The Sefer Refuas, Rashi says over here, and you look at Rashi in Psachim as well. Rashi explains that what would people do? People would, in fact, not nitlim, but they would rely on the Sefer Refuas. They wouldn't be davening in order to get the Chayla Hill. Remember what we just said about the Ramban and Parashat B'chuk. What's the reason for sickness? What are you supposed to do if somebody's ill? You're supposed to be going to the doctor or to the Navi. So this, the Rambam disagrees with vehemently in Pirush Mishnah Psachim. The Rambam says he's only going to write to you his whole long arichas. He says his snatzlos to explain why there's a massive arichas there, and he explains, I'm only doing this because everybody thinks that the problem with the Sefer Refuas was that nobody davened to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That wasn't the problem. Says the Rambam, what was the problem? Sefer Refuas, Sefer Shaya, in Yanulis, Rappers, but Dvarm Shalom, he tira tireless rappers, Ben, Kam Dvarm Shachashu, Baalei Atzur, is Vu, Ki Yesh, Anoshim Chachamim, the Chachmas like a Chacham, Pim, Yas Atzur, Litem, Yudum, Yilu, Ezekiel, Dvarm, Yudum, Vizu Atzur, Niklas Bloshin, Yavan, Talas, or what we call a talisman. That is to say, what is the Rambam saying? What's the issue with the Sefer Refuas? What's the reason that Chizkiyahu got rid of it? It wasn't because of the fact people were relying on that and not davening, but rather they were using that book which has inappropriate types of refuas in there. What do you mean inappropriate types of refuas? They did stuff that had to do with magic, that did stuff that had to do with idolatry. That's what the Sefer Refuas was. It wasn't some ancient book that had all this true healings and you didn't have to daven. No, it was false types of healings that would rely on inappropriate things that were also to do. And that's what it means that he got rid of the Sefer Refuas. That is the opinion of the Rambam. As I say, it's not the only opinion. Rashi obviously disagrees, and others disagree as well. That's number one. Number two, the Nachash, the Nachash. We talked about here the Nachash that Moshe Rabbeinu had made. He crushed it up. There's a Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Everybody remembers the Mishnah, the end of the third parak. The Mishnah tells us that when Moshe Rabbeinu was fighting the war against Amalek, remember Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting there with his arms outstretched and he couldn't hold his arms up. So he had Aaron V'chur. They held his hands up in order to be able to win the war. So what do you mean? They held his hands up and they won the war. Then they would Gavar Amalek. What does it mean? Says the Mishnah, does Moshe's hands win wars or not win wars? So what did the Mishnah answer? When Moshe Rabbeinu's hands were up, they looked up, they thought about their Rebbeinu Shalom, they davened, and that's how they got victory. But when his hands were down, they looked down, they thought it was just about them. They didn't rely on their Rebbeinu Shalom, they lost. Continues the Mishnah. Similarly to this, we have a similar situation. What Moshe Rabbeinu said, take this, let's make this a snake, put it on a pike, a stick, and anybody who was bitten by whoever was bitten by the snakes should look at this, and they will survive. If they got the message and they looked up to heaven and they davened, then they would survive. But if they didn't get the message, if they didn't daven, then they would die. This is the lesson of the snake, like the lesson of Moshe's hands. Why then get rid of the snake? It's been around for a long time, since the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, because people started viewing it as a talisman. People started viewing the snake as the thing that made them survive and not davening to the Moshe. So once it lost its purposes of convincing the Jewish people to daven, so then Chizkiyahu decided it's time to get rid of it. Okay, just one more point on this about the snake. You have to look at the Gemara on Chul and Vav base. The Gemara there says, right, the snake was now known as the Chushtan. The context of the Gemara is that Rebbe in Beit Shan was essentially making new rules about Trumas and Maishris, and they said to him, hey, your great grandfathers and grandfather, everybody, nobody made these rules, and then you're coming along making rules. So he wants to bring a raya that he's allowed to make new rules from this story of the Nachash. Says the Gemara that Rebbe is responding to them, and he says over here, the Amrullah, you're saying Beit Shan, you don't need to have Shumas Marshals, but in the previous generations they did. So he said to them as follows: Darsh them because they. He says, look at the pasuk in Malachim. It says, "V'kites nachash nechoshes." What did Chizkiyahu do? He crushed down the nachash. Asher asa Moshe ki anayam lahem b'nei somekachim lay. The Jewish people literally were viewing this as like an idol. They were burning incense in front of it, whatever the various things they used to do. V'yikol nechushtan, and they called it like their god, nechushtan. Efshar ba'asa v'loy bi'er ba'yashav v'loy bi'er. He says, I'm not the first righteous king. Yeah, my dad was a bad guy, Achaz, but there was what about Asa? What about Yehoshaphat? They were great kings. Why didn't they do something with the snake? The Jewish people are not behaving appropriately with the snake. Why didn't they do anything? Why didn't they have atzeres tefillas and have rallies and destroy the snake? Why is it only now in my time that I'm doing it? You want to know? Says Chizkiyahu as follows: So therefore, what is the answer? The answer is that sometimes there are things to do that weren't done in the previous generations. Why? Because the previous generations left space open for each and every one of us to be able to do things as well. And so my space or my ability to do something is in fact not because of the fact that there wasn't an issue then. There was an issue then. They didn't solve it. I'm going to solve it. This is the last piece I wanted to mention about the snake. Now, one other point on this sugya that we didn't get a chance to do yesterday that I did want to focus on. You remember that Yeshayahu's complaint to Chizkiyahu is, you're going to die. Why are you going to die? Because you're not having kids. Why are you not having kids? Because your kids are going to be bad. I get it. But it's not your job to be worried about the Rebbeinu Shalom's cheshbonos. Your job is you do the mitzvahs. How you know about what kind of kids you're going to have, that's not your business to know about these things. You don't have, you don't make decisions on the basis of knowledge that's far away from you. For all practical intents and purposes, but the Gemara did not tell us how Chizkiyahu knew he's going to have bad kids, right? We don't 100% know. Did he get a nevuah? Presumably not. Yeshaya didn't tell him there's such a nevuah. At least we're not aware of it. How did he know? I don't know. Let's put that on the side for a moment. But I just wanted to mention because it come up a lot, and we discussed this 4 years ago, I think, maybe when we discussed on Sundays in the shiurim on Sundays about Zionism. We discussed the Piskei Tshuva. The Piskei Tshuva deals with the following question: what happens? You have a mitzvah. Let's assume that everybody agrees on a mitzvah to make aliyah. And we're not talking about today, where it's possible to get jobs, but talking about the oldness when it wasn't so obvious how to have parnas and the like. So should a person make aliyah when he knows that he's going to have problems with parnasa? Right? Should you do something? Right? Let's say in this case, you make a mitzvah, daraisa, to live in Eretz Yisrael. Yes? Okay. Let's assume everybody agrees with that. We're not going with Moshe that it's a mitzvah. Kiyumus, we're not going with the approach from the Gil Sester. That's not a mitzvah. Let's just assume for the moment the Ramban is correct. It is a mitzvah. And you have to do it. Okay. But if I know that if I do the mitzvah, I'm going to have very negative applications, very negative implications. Does that mean I do it or not? This is the question Piskei Tshuva is coming to answer. He doesn't bring down our Gemara, but he gives you the basic idea, and he says as follows. Amnam came for sure, the only way you have the mitzvah to make aliyah is if you have enough ability to make parnas. Of course, wonderful for somebody who's able to do it in an Israel Brias and doesn't have to rely on tzedakah. Even if he has to live not such a great life, but at least he's able to live. But not everybody is zeicha to this kind of a level. The people already have a minute. They do not make aliyah when they have kids. And that's because it's very hard to make a living. And it's difficult for kids. And you have to be afraid that the kids, you're going to raise them up in poverty, that they're going to go and not be very firm anymore. That they're not ready to be devoting this kind of a life to Chayetzah that you're willing to sacrifice your life for it, but your kids are not necessarily willing to sacrifice their life for it. It's not a good thing for people to go there to Israel and go live a Chayetzah, to be relying on tzedakah and to be messing up their kids. That's not something that one should be doing. So here you see a situation. We have a mitzvah. It's 100%. Let's nuskam that there is a mitzvah to make aliyah, and nevertheless we're saying there are negative implications that are going to be a result of that. You can see, not because you're a Navi, just natural implications. Let's say you're a certain type of professional, and that professional class is not accredited, or you have to go through school again and do all sorts of things, and you're therefore not going to be able to live. You're going to have to rely on tzedakah, and you're going to have to. Says B'chetshuva, your kids didn't sign up to this. You don't have to do this. Right? The negative implications that you can see with your own rational mind are sufficient enough to waive that mitzvah. Okay. Now let's continue on the Gemara. Says the Gemara, we are at the two dots. Maybe one last point to just mention about Chizkiyahu Melech before we move on is that Chizkiyahu Melech, in terms of his expertise of the Real Politik, was pretty right and spot on, right, in the sense that he manages to keep the Jewish people from falling under the thumb of Ashur, but it wasn't always 100% in accordance with what the Navi were telling him. And they may have been, as we see, they may have been related. It may very well have been that Chizkiyahu was a son-in-law of Yeshaya. One thing to note is that Chizkiyahu, at least according to Chazal, felt what he was doing very, very personally. There's a Gemara in Sanhedrin Samach Gimel and Beis. The Gemara says that Achaz, who had started out as being a decent king, at least the way he treated Nevi'im was decent, but he ends up being an idolater and very bad. The Gemara says that Achaz, one of the things that he violated was Melech, right? Sacrificing your kids in front of the idol. They would burn the kids. And Chizkiyahu's mother, Avio, she saves him by rubbing his body with salamander blood, which was supposed to be impervious to fire, and that's what Chizkiyahu survives. His own father tried to kill him, right? So this is when we see that Chizkiyahu, one of the things that they praised him for was that he was Gir Atzmei Sa'aviv. That's the context, the background. His own father tried to kill him, according to Chazal, in the past. On the science and Torah aspect of this Gemara, which is the blood of salamanders, in fact, resists fire, we'll have to wait for another time to discuss. Okay, continues the Gemara. So we're at the two dots. Rabbi Yechon Shem Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. If you remember, we've had in Brachot, Rabbi Yechon Shem Rabbi Yosi, but we didn't necessarily get the full address of Shem Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. But all those Rabbi Yosis were Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. Rabbi Yechon Shem Rabbi Yosi ben Zimra. Everybody who is toila the schus of being saved in himself, the schus that he will be saved will be done for others. And whoever is toilet the schus that he should be saved in others, it'll be toilet himself. What's the examples? Moshe is toilet the schus that the Jewish people should be helped in others, not in himself. Moshe Rabbeinu is davening that Hashem should use the schus of the others. So if you look there in the pasuk, and Tehillim says that Moshe Rabbeinu's schus is the Jewish people are saved. Hashem wants to destroy the Jewish people. Lulei Moshe bechiroi amad beperet, the fun of lahashiv chamasai mehashres. Right? It's Moshe Rabbeinu who stood in the gap. It's Moshe Rabbeinu who stood up to stop and to as it were to restrain, to calm down, as it were. Lahavdil Hakadosh Baruch Hu's anger and from coming out to destroy the Jewish people. So Moshe Rabbeinu gets the credit, but Moshe Rabbeinu himself never davened for the credit for himself, that I'm such a great guy. I'm the Adam Mikol Adam. I'm the guy who knows you upon him, upon him. I'm the guy who's such a great. No. Moshe Rabbeinu davened for the schus. The Jewish people should be saved for the others, right? So not for himself, not because he's a great guy. However, compare that to what we just saw from Chizkiyahu. Chizkiyahu told b'schus atzma is Chizkiyahu. Look at this pasuk which we already quoted just before. Zacharna es asher salachti lefanecha. Chizkiyahu says, "Remember me. I have walked before you with such goodness and honesty and justice. I should be saved because I'm a good guy." So tola b'schus acherim. Chizkiyahu gets saved, but it's not in his schus. In the end, it's the schus of who? Look at there in the pasuk in Melachim. Shenemar v'kanoisi elo'ir azois lo'shia lema'ani. David Avdi. Hashem says, I'm going to save the city for my sake and for the sake of David, my servant, but not for your sake. In other words, Chizkiyahu is told b'schus atzmai, and he gets saved, but it's only because of schus cher, not because of himself. This is the word of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, what does it mean? It says in pasuk, Hine l'shalom marli. Right, behold, there's peace. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya. but it's bitter to me. What does it mean? Peace is bitter to me. Mar says the Gemara. Mar afilu b'shah sheshigeh le'akadosh baruch hu shalom. Mar huloi. Even in the moment when Hakadosh Baruch Hu is giving him peace, it was still bitter to him. In other words, because Chizkiyahu felt, the a little bittersweet. Oh, that's a good one. Bittersweet. What's the bittersweet? Yes, the Jewish people are saved. Yes, the army of Sennacherib somehow passes away. Yes, the remnants leave. All that's amazing, but bittersweet because he knows that it didn't happen on his own schus, on his own merit. It happened on the merit of David HaMelech. Ultimately, he's just a cog in the wheel in the face of David HaMelech. And of course, the ultimate schus, Hashem says that he wants to do it for his own benefit or his own sake. Okay, so now we finished the Gemara with Chizkiah, but we do have one more drasha on the word of Kir, and now we're going to see the other story, the fuller story of the Shunamis that we had already brought up before, right? So that the Gemara that we had before thought that Chizkiah was davening, saying Kal v'chomer, if the Shunamis made one little Kir and she gets her son saved, so Shlomo HaMelech, my Zayda, he made such a massive Kir, meaning he made a huge hall, a huge Beis HaMikdash for you, so then I should for sure be saved. And now we want to go up a little bit more understanding the Shunamis. Again, notice the two dots. We are almost at the very wide lines. Nasale Elias Kir Kitana to Rav Ushmuel Chad Amar Aliyah Pura Haisa Vikirua. One, we don't know which one, says that what there was basically like a second story, but it was no ceiling on it. There was no roof. So what they did is that they put a roof on the second floor, and so then he had a room. And one says no, it was like a big porch, a big portico. And they made it into two, so now he would have a room for himself. So Bishlam asks, but no, notice the words of the pasuk. Nasa no aliyas kir kitana. Aliyas sounds like a port, like a roof, and kir sounds like a wall. So the Gemara says you can see sort of both of them in there. So the Gemara says Bishlam sadra. According to the Madam, who says that it was really in fact like a second story that was not enclosed. So Hana Dechsev Kir. That's what it means. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. According to Madam, who says it was an Aksadra, that was a big room, and they just put up a wall. So they split up the room. The Bishlam Aksadra Hana Dechsev Kir. That's what it means, a wall. That they just split up the room. They made a wall, and that was it. And then there was enough room for Elisha. But according to Madam, it says it was an Aliyah, that it was a second story, and they had to put up a whole roof. My Kir. What does it mean, a wall? What does the wall got to do with it? A wall is not something you put on as a roof. So the Gemara explains Shekirua, that they built up the wall on top. That is to say, a ceiling, a roof. So Bishlam of the Madam Aliyah makes sense according to the Madam who holds it was an Aliyah, meaning it was already a second story there that they covered. Hano the Siv Aliyas. That's what it means in Pasuk when it says Naaseno Aliyas Kirkatana, right? That's what it means. Aliyah was referring to the second story. Sadra, but according to Madam, that it was just a room that had to be split into two. So then my Aliyas. So why is it used the word Aliyas in the pasuk? Says the Gemara Meula Shemabatan to make it really nice. So either way, Rav or Shmuel, whichever one holds which, you can put it into the understanding here of the pasuk as to what they did for Elisha in order to make him a nice room, a covered place that he could come rest when he would come by. So what did they do when they made the room? Says the pasuk v'nasam lo yisham mita v'shulchan v'kisei umanar. They put in there like what you would need for a guest, right? They made it like a guest room. They put in there a candle. They put in there a bed, a table, a chair. The things were, a traveling navi, what he would need when he would pass by. So the Gemara says from this a very interesting topic. We have a lot more to say on this, but we'll have to suffice with just this what the Gemara says. Amar Abai Vitem Rabbi Yitzchak. Somebody who wants to take hana from others can take hana like Elisha, and somebody who does not want to take hana from others should not take hana like Shmuel. Haramasi, right? Shenemar, what did it say in Pasuk about Shmuel? Utseshuvasa Ramasa, when Shmuel would return back to Ramah. Where Ramah is a big question in archaeology, we can't discuss anymore. But when Shmuel would come back to Ramah, Kisham Besa, because that's where his house was. From Rav Yechon, what does it mean, Sham Besa? Shekom Makim Shehalach Sham Besa Imai. Wherever he would go, that would be his house. Now the larger pasuk here, which Rashi brings down, is that he would Kisham Beis. If you look at the longer Rashi brings down the pasuk, and Shmuel basically do a circuit. When in the federal courts they have the lower court judges and they have the Supreme Court. In the middle they have what's called the circuit judges. What does it mean? Why are they called the circuit? the appeals courts are known as like the circuit judges, right? Right? Am I correct? It's like something called the First Circuit, the Second Circuit, the Tenth Circuit. Why do they have the circuits? So I think there was in the olden days that the way they worked with the circuits is that the judges would travel different places to hear cases. That would be the circuit that they would have to travel around. And this is how Shmuel was. Shmuel would go around the whole country. He would travel. He'd make a circuit, and he would come back to Ramah. Once a year, he would come back. He would do a circuit. And circuit has probably to do with circle. I haven't checked into it, I assume. In any event, so Shmuel would do these journeys. We know the Gemara tells us in Shabbos on Nunhei that his kids were halech achar batza. So the Gemara says no, you can't say that they were literally taking bribes, but rather they didn't make a circuit anymore. Now they stayed in place. They stayed in their place. I think it was Beersheba, and they wouldn't leave. And so you wanted them to decide a case. You had to go there to get them to decide a case. That was a very major difference between Shmuel, who would go around the country to hear all disputes, versus making people come out to trudge all the way to him. But we're learning out from Shmuel that he didn't take anything. And we're learning it out from this pasuk. And I always wondered, why is this the pasuk that we're learning it out from? We have another pasuk when they wanted to have a king, and Shmuel screaming at them not that the king is a bad thing. Shmuel said to them, he says to the Jewish people, he says, Hineni ani bi negdo v'neged mishichai eshor milakachti v'chamon milakachti v'esmi ashakti esmi ratzesi umiyad milakachti kaifer. Shmuel says there to them, who did I take a horse from? Who did I take a donkey from? Who did I take anything from? Anybody here have anything to say that I did? No one can say anything, because what's a king going to do? He's going to take everything. He's going to take your sons. He's going to put them in the army. He's going to take your daughters. He's going to make them cooks. He's going to take your land. He's going to make himself highways. He's going to take everything. But Shmuel's comparing himself to the eventual king. The Mishpatei Malukah is saying, I'm not taking anything. I never took anything, but a king will. So why don't we use that pasuk? I'm not sure. I would also mention that there is another person we can learn from who never took anything, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu, right? The pasuk in Parshas Korach, Moshe Rabbeinu gets angry at the fact that Korach is saying these terrible things about Moshe and Aaron, and Moshe Rabbeinu says about himself to them that I never even asked for a donkey ride. I never took anything from the Jewish people, not one thing. That, as I say, has much larger implications. We cannot discuss that now. Then is the Gemara. We're continuing now. We're in the third wide line of the widest lines. So she says to her husband, the Shanama says to her husband, I know he's a very holy guy. How does he know that she's so holy? We can know that a woman knows her guests, whether or not they're good people, more than the husband. Why? The Rabbi Shmuel. Again, Rabbi Shmuel Amar. One says, one says she never saw flies hanging around. Remember in those days, they didn't have fly catchers, so flies would come to the meals. And no fly came to his. Once just he put a nice, coverlet on his bed, and he was not right carry. So that's how he knew it was a Kaddish. Kaddish who? He's a Kaddish man. Rav Yossi again, Rav Yossi who Kaddish Misharis and a Kaddish. You should dash, and he was holy, but his Misharis was not Kaddish. Why? Because when she came later on with trying to get him to daven for her son, he tried to push her away. So Rav Yossi that he pushed her away in an inappropriate way, as Rashi says, when he grabbed onto her. So he was holy, but his person was not holy. His shamash was not holy. Continues the Gemara. He came by a lot. Whoever is going to host in his house and give them from his possessions, it's like somebody who brought a carbon tamid. Also, look at the Gemara at the end of Ksubas on Kuf Yud Aleph from a base. The Gemara over there says, how do you be able to mistake with Shechina? So we translate the whole idea of not as being cleaving onto the bunch, but rather as onto the Talmidei Chachamim. El Kal Mesi B'Tal Talmid Chacham V'Yisrael Permakti Talmidei Chacham Mahana Talmidei Chacham Min Chacham. Whoever gives Talmidei Chacham from his Nechasim, Allah v'Kasav Omer is like Midavik B'Shechina, like we're seeing over here. Continues the Gemara. Do not daven in a high place. Daven in a low place. If you go to the shuls in Europe, old shuls, you will see that the place where the chassan davens is further down, because this pasuk of Mimamakim, which is brought down A person shouldn't daven standing up on chairs, just standing on stools or standing in high places. Daven from a lower place. You don't want to show your haughtiness in front of the bench. Because we say from the depths, I call out to you, Hashem. Right, the ani is going to be davening. You have to feel like an ani. You have to feel like a poor person. You have to feel like you need something. You're davening to the bench to help you. You're not coming from a place of haughtiness. Somebody who's davening has to keep his feet together. We learn it from the angels that they had one foot, that our feet are together like an angel. That looks like as well regular Yishuv. What does it mean that you're not allowed to eat on the blood? Right? You're not able to eat before you daven. We're talking here now about eating before davening with regards to shachas. Mincha Musaf is a separate conversation. We'll get to later on. Whoever eats and drinks and then davens, the pasuk compares him. What does that mean? Don't read the pasuk as gavecha. I'll take a gavecha. I'll ge'ech. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu la'achashin is gozeh. After this person is so haughty and so showing off, he's now eating and drinking and having himself a good old time. Kibul of Malchus Shemayim. That is mekabel of Malchus Shemayim. I just wanted to point out we have a coffee urn over here. So how do we justify that? The Mishnah Berurah is not so happy about it. If you look at Mishnah Berurah in Pei Tes, Mishnah Berurah says, if you put sugar in the tea, they shouldn't have an empty heart when you're doing this. Says the Mishnah Berurah, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. So what do we rely on? We rely on the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan says that the people eat it with grass. No, it doesn't mean that kind of grass. It means tea, says the Aruch HaShulchan. There's no issue with sugar. Some only say sugar cubes. Someone want to say it's us. No, it's not a problem. Nearly the us. Maybe milk should be us. The chol must be because chol makes you full. It has calories. Whether that is true or not scientifically, I have no idea. Blood turning into milk, turning to blood, not sure. If the coffee must be, even though coffee maybe has calories, I have no idea if it does. Other things that he calls here lemonade. Anything for food, of course, is mutter. We're not talking about refuah, so you have the Aruch HaShulchan rely in terms of having milk and sugar and on all the like. But we still have to finish. We have another line to do. Amar Chizda. So I'm sorry, Rabbi Shua up to Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua says, you have to that you're able to say Shema until 3 hours into the day. You don't lose out. What does it mean? Or you're not allowed to, you're not going to say the brachas Kriyashma after the 3 hours. Meisvei says, but we learned that we just said in the Mishnah that somebody who's saying it afterwards, he's not mafsid. It's like somebody who's saying the Torah. But you can still make the brachas of Kriyashma. It slugs up Rabbi Chizda. Another version of Rabbi Chizda said, they didn't say it wrong. He said that you're not being mafsid on the brachas. But a person is able to still make the brachas of Kriyashma even if they're saying the Shema after the Zman of Kriyashma. We already quoted this in the Perishah Mishnah on the Rambam. The Rambam wrote, based upon this Gemara, that Rav Mani said, if somebody reads Kriyashma in its right time, it's greater than learning. Why? Because we say after this Zman of Kriyashma, you can still say Shema with the brachas. It's not going to be any worse than somebody who's learning Torah. The Kurban also, obviously, see somebody who's saying the Shema in the right time is even greater than learning Torah. Have a wonderful day.